My name's Phil Dyke and I'm the Coast and Marine Advisor for the National Trust. The scale of the Trust's work on the coast, we're a membership organisation, and the more people that are members obviously gives us more funds to work with in terms of acquiring and managing coastal land. The objective really is to grow our membership to about 5 million over the next 5 to 10 years from currently about 3.8 million, which would give us a lot more funds for our work on the coast. The Trust is still viewed as an organisation that looks after primarily castles, houses, gardens. But actually we own 700 miles of coastline.
My name's Amy Netley and I'm a second year PhD student at the University of Exeter, and I'm working with the National Trust on a project which is making 3D visualisations of a National Trust site at Coteal, which is near Plymouth on the Tamar Valley, and I'm using point data to make a model.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the rangers for the National Trust on the North Coast in Cornwall, and our job's fairly varied, but it's basically about looking after the countryside and helping people to enjoy the countryside.
Well, primarily I'm using terrestrial laser scan data, which is kind of ground LiDAR. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. Using this data to create a mesh which I then put into other software to make a 3D model which can look as realistic as I want it to be and can be millimetre to centimetre accurate. I'm inputting flooding scenarios which I'm getting tidal predictions from the Environment Agency, and I'm making a sort of a model out of this which can be used as a tool for community engagement about flooding and change at heritage sites.
We're now looking at different ways of communicating with people, very much kind of looking at kind of website and social media as a way of getting information to people, but also a way that they can communicate more with us. The advent of computers as well has made a big change in how people are communicated with and how their working life has changed. Sort of, you know, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people would have just been outside getting on and doing the practical side of the job, and there wouldn't have been much office side to the job. And I think mobile phones as well have had, it sounds really old-fashioned, but has had quite an impact as well, because it means that people can contact you while you're out and about.
The Cornish coastline is going to be greatly affected by climate change, and this is primarily by sea level rise, sort of increased flooding from greater tidal ranges, and increased storminess and precipitation. Currently, flood models are struggling to predict how increased precipitation, which is one of the predicted impacts of climate change, is going to impact on the landscape and therefore cause increased flooding at certain sites. But lots of these are small communities dotted around the Cornish coastline which will struggle to understand how they're going to be impacted, because it may not be a significant economic impact, but to local communities they're going to feel the effects of rising sea levels quite severely.
My name is Dan Jarvis. I'm an animal care assistant at the National Seal Sanctuary, where we rescue, rehabilitate and release grey seal pups, and also provide a home in the long term to animals that haven't got one elsewhere and can't be released out to the wild for long-term health problems, for example. When we get a pup arrive here for care at the sanctuary, we'll start off in our isolation unit in part of our hospital building. There we'll do a full clinical assessment on the pup, take blood samples, clean its injuries, and we'll start them on 24 hours worth of fluid feeds just to flush through the digestive system. We'll speak to our vet about the pup as well and get it on the correct antibiotics for the illnesses and injuries that it might have. And from then on, depending on the age of the pup, if it's a very young one, we'll start it on the milk substitute that will tube feed it every 4 hours like its mum would. And if it's an older pup, we'll start them on fish. In some cases the pups don't quite know how to eat them themselves, so they actually have to be force-fed by us, and we'll leave fish on the floor for them, so gradually they can learn how to eat them by themselves.
A lot of the sites that the seals use can be quite remote sites, but some of them can be quite close to, say, the coast path. So that's good in some ways, because it means that lots of people can see seals, see them in the wild, which is just a great way to see wild animals, see them in the proper place where they should be. But that can come with some problems as well. Seals can be quite easily disturbed by humans if they're making a lot of noise, or if they're wearing very bright clothing, or if they have dogs with them that are barking. And if the seals get disturbed and feel unsafe in that place, then they'll just go back into the water.
When they're doing much better, they can move out from our main hospital building to our outdoor pools. In there they'll be housed with a few other pups initially in a smaller enclosure, and they can learn in there to feed properly by themselves instead of ripping up the fish. They'll start putting on weight down there, learning a few social lessons too from one another, and then they get moved into our larger convalescent pool where we house some of our resident grey seal adults, and again in there they learn a few social lessons from them. But they also end up getting much larger as well, of course, ready for their release. They really need to fend for themselves at that point and learn to get their fair share of the fish at the feeding time.
Seals are, I mean, they're obviously an iconic species. They spend most of their time in the ocean, but obviously the haul-out sites that they have are really quite important, and we do try, working with other community-based groups, to provide good access to people so that they can see the seals, but without actually them then becoming disturbed in their haul-out, on their haul-out beaches.
We've found through our work here that there's organisations with similar goals to ours, which is ultimately the conservation of seal species and the other wildlife that we get around here as well, of course. So there's organisations like the Cornwall Seal Group who we work closely with regard to seals in particular. Also the National Trust, as some of their land occasionally does include seal colonies, including breeding areas as well. So sometimes if there are pups being born in those areas, the wardens at those sites will monitor those pups to make sure that they're feeding okay with their mum and are weaned successfully by them as well.
Over the last few years, the Trust's interest in younger people has definitely accelerated, because part of this shift from the perception being around houses and castles and gardens to activities that young people are engaged in, and surfing's been a very good example of that. So 5 years ago we have had a lot of surfers joining the National Trust, but we weren't really engaging with them. They were using us as a season ticket to park their car, and we were happy to see them, it's fine, but we weren't actually getting our coastal messages across to, you know, the sort of under 25s. And actually, in terms of climate change, that's the group that's going to have to pick up the mess that we've made of things and actually work with this in the future in terms of resolving. So an awareness, from my point of view, of coastal change and erosion and flooding and what that means for the future is really handy. So we've got now Robin Davis, who's a British champion surfer, and she is working with the surfing community on surfing, which is the kind of hook, but actually subliminally almost building our messages into her work and telling them what we do on the coast, in the marine environment, and our coastal management and the access opportunities to broaden their understanding.
As if we engage people in a dialogue about change at an earlier stage, and not trying to tell people this is going to happen, but get people thinking about the ideas around climate change and coastal change and sea level rise, then people will be more open to adaptation. And I think that's what the National Trust are doing, is they're taking a sort of really proactive step towards helping people understand what might happen. And they're not trying to tell people what's going to happen and that's the end of the story. They're trying to get people thinking about these ideas at an earlier stage so that they can work with people and with all their members and the local communities to find a way collectively that they can answer these questions about what are they going to do in the future.
The National Trust in 3 words.
3 words.
The National Trust in 3 words.
Exciting wild spaces.
Outstanding coastal experiences.
Forever for everyone.
All manner of pills and piles up analyst pills in the country. Here she comes